Grahas, Rashis, Bhavas, Dashas. Unlock the code. Unlock destiny. Today, I'd like to draw your attention to one detail in Beyoncé's birth chart that I believe many astrologers overlook. We're looking at one of the most beautiful women in modern music. But that raises a simple question. Can we actually see her beauty in the birth chart? The obvious place to begin is the ascendant. In Vedic astrology, the ascendant describes the body, physical appearance, and a person's natural qualities. And the traditional significator of beauty is Venus. So let's open the Rashi chart. And here we immediately face a problem. The ruler of the ascendant is Mars. But Mars is debilitated. Yes, Nicha Bhanga Yoga may greatly reduce that weakness. Mars can certainly explain determination, endurance, and extraordinary drive. But is that really enough to explain Beyoncé's beauty? Whenever I face a chart like this, I remember one rule that years of practice have taught me. Never analyze the Rashi chart by itself. Always check the Bhava Chalit chart. Sometimes a planet shifts into another house, and suddenly the entire chart begins to look different. Let's compare the two charts. Now something very interesting appears. In the Bhava Chalit chart, Venus has moved into the 7th house, its own sign, where it casts its aspect onto the ascendant. Suddenly, the chart begins to tell a very different story. Whenever I see a planet changing houses like this, I never rush to a conclusion. If I'm working with a living client, I ask what happened during that planet's dasha. If I'm studying a historical figure, as in Beyoncé's case, I turn to the biography and look for confirmation in real events. Only then do I draw a conclusion. I'm not suggesting that every astrologer should work this way. I'm simply inviting you to test this approach in your own practice. You may discover that Bhava Chalit reveals something the Rashi chart alone could never show. And this isn't an isolated case. Joanne Rowling's chart tells a very similar story. We'll examine that case in a future episode. We've looked at Venus. But Beyoncé's chart raises another question. Why has her success remained so remarkably consistent? Take a look at the major milestones of her life. From Destiny's Child, to Grammy Awards, to a record-breaking solo career. The overall direction hardly changes. There are disappointments. There are challenges. But there is no prolonged decline. That is exactly the kind of pattern that always catches my attention. Over the years, I've developed another simple rule. Whenever a pattern remains stable throughout an entire lifetime, start with the ascendant. In fact, I begin almost every chart there. Who rules the ascendant? Where is that planet placed? What influences it? Because the ascendant sets the overall potential of the chart. I sometimes explain it with a simple analogy. The ascendant determines whether life allows you to drink happiness from a thimble or from a bucket. Even the strongest planetary combinations can only operate within the limits set by the ascendant. And when the ascendant is truly strong, even difficult planetary periods rarely become life-changing disasters. That's why I don't believe Venus alone can explain nearly 3 decades of continuous success. Venus may explain beauty. Venus may explain popularity. But lasting stability usually points somewhere else. So let's take a closer look at the ruler of the ascendant, Mars. At first glance, Mars doesn't look especially impressive. It is debilitated, So why didn't Beyoncé's career follow the pattern we might expect? The answer begins to appear as soon as we look more carefully. First, Mars receives Nichabhanga. But there is another detail that is very easy to miss. Mars is almost exactly conjunct Rahu. The distance between them is only about 1 degree. I don't see Rahu as a planet that gives fame, or wealth, or success. To me, Rahu works differently. Rahu is an amplifier. It doesn't create the signal. It simply makes the existing signal stronger. If the nearby planet is strong, its influence becomes stronger. If the nearby planet is weak, its weakness may also become stronger. The closer Rahu is, the stronger that amplification becomes. In Beyoncé's chart, Rahu is almost touching the ruler of the ascendant. That makes Mars much more powerful than it first appears. But that's still not the end of the story. So how do we test that idea? We turn to the timeline, and we compare it with the dashas. Take a careful look. The planetary periods change, the sub-periods change, yet the overall direction of Beyoncé's life remains remarkably consistent. There are setbacks, there are disappointments, but they never develop into a prolonged decline. That is exactly what we would expect from a strong ascendant. Now let's look at something more specific. For an Aries ascendant, Mercury is usually one of the more challenging planets. In the Rashi chart, Virgo occupies the 6th house. At first sight, Mercury periods might be expected to create noticeable difficulties. But let's look at the actual events. From 2000 to 2003, Beyoncé entered one of the most important phases of her entire career. Destiny's Child reached worldwide success. The album Survivor topped the charts. She won Grammy Awards. She began acting. She signed major commercial contracts. And then came the turning point. Her first solo album, Dangerously in Love. It debuted at number 1. Crazy in Love became a global hit. Her solo career exploded. This is exactly where I stopped looking only at the Rashi chart. And I opened the Bhava Chalit chart again. Notice what happens. Not only can planets change houses, signs can shift as well. Virgo no longer occupies the 6th house in the same way. The chart begins to describe the events much more naturally. That is why I never rely on the Rashi chart alone. Whenever the biography and the chart seem to disagree, Bhava Chalit is the first place I look before questioning the birth time. Many apparent contradictions disappear on their own. And that is exactly what makes Bhava Chalit such a valuable research tool. We've answered 2 important questions. Why does the chart describe Beyoncé's beauty? And why has her success remained so consistent throughout her life? But one question still remains. Why music? Why the stage? Why did this chart produce one of the most successful performers of our time? Once again, the chart gives us a clue. Look at the 5th house. In Vedic astrology, the 5th house is the house of creativity. It is the house of performance, self-expression, art, entertainment. And standing in the middle of that house is the sun. Not just any sun, the sun in Leo, its own sign, strong, confident, completely at home. When I see a placement like this, I immediately think of people who are meant to stand in front of an audience. Teachers, lecturers, actors, performers. People whose purpose is to be seen, to inspire, to express themselves creatively. Now combine that with everything we've already discovered. A beautiful Venus influencing the ascendant, a powerful ascendant supported by Nichabhanga, Mars strengthened by Rahu, and now, a strong sun in the 5th house. Suddenly the picture becomes much clearer. Venus may help explain beauty. The ascendant may explain lifelong strength. But the sun explains the stage. It explains why millions of people were willing to watch her perform. No single planet tells the whole story. Each one answers a different question. And only when those answers begin to fit together does the chart start to reflect the life we actually see. So, what have we actually learned from Beyoncé's chart? First, never judge Venus by the Rashi chart alone. Always compare it with the Bhava Chalit chart. Second, if a pattern remains stable throughout an entire lifetime, begin with the ascendant. The ascendant defines the overall potential of the chart. Third, when Nicha Bhanga strengthens the ruler of the ascendant, its influence may extend far beyond a single planet. It can strengthen the foundation of the entire chart. Fourth, I don't think Rahu creates success. To me, Rahu is an amplifier. It makes a strong signal stronger, and it makes a weak signal louder as well. Finally, don't expect one planet to explain an entire life. Venus explains beauty. The ascendant explains lifelong potential. The sun explains the stage. Only when those answers come together does the chart begin to explain the life. I don't expect you to accept these conclusions simply because I say so. Open a few well-documented birth charts. Compare the Rashi chart with the Bhava Chalit chart. Test these ideas for yourself. You may reach the same conclusions, or you may discover something completely different. Either way, that is how real research moves forward. Unlock Destiny is an ongoing research project in Vedic astrology. If you enjoy testing astrological principles against real lives, I invite you to join us. Subscribe to the channel, and don't miss the next case study. I'll see you in the next episode.